Is she for real? Russian socialite turned journalist and activist Ksenia Sobchak staging her first press conference since last week's surprise announcement that the former It Girl, with the 5.3 million Instagram followers, is bidding to unseat her late father's former protege at St. Petersburg City Hall. That man is Vladimir Putin, a serious challenger to Russia's incumbent president, or a convenient foil in a race where officially for now the only credible challenger is barred from running. Sobchak says she'll withdraw her candidacy if Alexei Navalny is on the ballot. The anti-corruption campaigner is just out of jail after his latest stint in prison. But is the opposition's message getting heard beyond the upwardly mobile circles of the big cities? We'll be asking our panel what the kickoff to this campaign says about the state of today's Russia and about the man who's been at the Kremlin for 18 years now and counting. Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at Russia's fresh face. With us, Selina Servatas, foreign editor for advocacy group Open Russia.
Hello.
Nice to see you again.
Thank you for having me.
Welcome back as well to Dmitry Boschman, editor-in-chief for Radio Sputnik France.
Hello.
Thanks for being with us. France 24's Douglas Herbert watching it all.
Evening.
And from Washington, Tikhon Dziadko, journalist for Russian language channel RTVI. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Hi.
The France 24 debate on Facebook and Twitter, the hashtag F24debate. She told a packed news conference her campaign was, well, a vote against all. 35-year-old Ksenia Sobchak explaining her decision to run. Marius Sophos has more. All right, we'll try to go to that report a little bit later on. Perhaps we can hear more from her in a bit as well. She also at that press conference, and this was the surprising bit. I'll start with you, Tikhon Dziadko. She, in that report, in that press conference, said that she would bow out if Alexei Navalny was allowed to run. What was your reaction to that?
Well, I must say that all the words that Ksenia Sobchak was saying this morning in Moscow, they were pretty surprising, and it was interesting to me to hear that, not only about Alexei Navalny, but also that she said that she was going to campaign to the freedom for all political prisoners in Russia, and that she thinks that she considers that Crimea is, in terms of international law, is a part of Ukraine and not of Russia. So all these words, they are words of a real opposition politician in Russia. But the problem is not with Ksenia Sobchak. The problem is with the context. The problem is with the elections. Because you can say that the elections are fair and that they are free, not if the last day, the day of the election is okay, but it's a huge process. The first part of this process is that all the citizens who want to run for the president, they have the right to run for the president. And now not all the citizens have this right in Russia. I'm talking about Alexei Navalny. So without Alexei Navalny in bailout and without free press and free courts, etc., 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 we can only consider these elections as a charade. And so the participation of Ksenia Sobchak is just a part of this huge charade.
You think that he definitely will be barred?
I'm sorry?
You think he'll definitely be barred from running?
Alexei Navalny?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I cannot see any reason for Kremlin to agree on his participation in the election. He's popular. He is campaigning very well over the last 10 months. He is having his rallies and meetings with his supporters in Russian regions. No one is doing anything like this. So Kremlin just does not need a guy like him in the election, because if he is registered as a candidate, then he has an access to the state TV, and then he has an opportunity, a possibility to talk to a lot of people. Kremlin doesn't need it. Kremlin needs a very calm, very normal election of Vladimir Putin. And Ksenia Sobchak, somehow she will be very useful, because she will take part of Alexei Navalny's supporters from the street to the poll stations.
Do you agree with that assessment, Elena Servatas, that she's a useful foil, in other words?
She's useful for Kremlin. As I agree with Tikhon, because until Alexei Navalny doesn't participate in this election, we can not really call it an election. For me, it's a show until all people who wants to be registered, they are not registered. By the way, I cannot. Not because I'm like Alexei Navalny, I'm not 35 years old yet. So, but at the same time, I can see that she's a very smart businesswoman, and I understand very clearly her agenda. As Tikhon told, that she was mentioning, for example, political prisoners, because she was advised to tell this. And we heard a very loud voice of Zoya Svetova, who is a very strong human rights defender, and she said, just to prove that you're real, come on, you say this. And she just did it. So she will win a lot with this participation. She will win a lot of followers. She will win the access to the state TV. She will win a larger audience. So she's smart, and she's doing what she needs.
Dmitry Boschman?
It's interesting because, in a way, Elena's boss, or the main sponsor of the organization that she works for, endorsed Ksenia Sobchak as...
You should quote the exact quote of Mikhail Khodorkovsky. He never endorsed anybody.
It was a kind of an endorsement,
no, kind of.
But the thing is that he sees this election as an opportunity to vote for any candidate but Putin. That's more or less what he said.
No, it's not exact quote. He said that just to be clear, I don't endorse anybody. You can just read it. It's in Telegram and in his Facebook. He doesn't think that's a real election, but he can welcome anybody who wants to participate.
So
but he never endorsed Ksenia Sobchak. Come on.
He welcomed Ksenia Sobchak. So the main debate, more or less, thanks for quoting Sputnik. The main debate is whether she's a real candidate or a spoiler. And there are some arguments that she can become a real candidate if she wishes. For instance, she recruited Malashchenko, a spin doctor,
who was
one of the main
campaign
advisors,
manager for Boris Yeltsin.
Yeah, one of the main advisors for the Boris Yeltsin campaign. So even if we can witness some amateurism with Ksenia Sobchak, these are the steps that a politician should take in order to get her votes. So she also would like to see some prominent economists like Movchan or Inozemtsev to join her campaign. She's now looking for some senior economic advisor. So hopefully for her, she will find one. But at the same time, there are some reason to believe that she's not playing for real. If we take her declaration and stance on Crimea, for instance, because whether she says that Crimea is Ukrainian according to the international law, Alexei Navalny, that we've previously mentioned, says that it's not a sandwich. It belongs to the people of the Crimea, and you cannot basically give it back. So, in a way, she's trying to. Her stance is more radical on some points. And Navalny is more playing to please the voters, because 97% of the Russian voters and Russian people, according to a research by a famous Russian pollster, they think that Crimea is part of Russia.
Douglas Herbert, let's talk about Ksenia Sobchak.
Yeah.
And because remember last week when this surprise announcement came out over Instagram, there were even reports in the West saying, "Oh, this is the Russian Paris Hilton." It's far from it.
Yeah, you know, she's how many labels have been attached to this woman over the years, you know, and I think a lot of her international, I guess, recognition began. There was a New York Times cover story a few years back calling her Russia's it girl. She's been called a socialite. She's been, you know, if it were a male candidate, I don't think we'd be using all of these terms. I think there's been a real objectification of her. The fact of the matter is, regardless of where you stand politically and what you think of her political views, she is a very astute, a very politically astute, and a very intelligent woman. She hosts a show on an independent website called TV Rain. Well, it's on the internet mostly, and she was a TV celebrity host, and a lot's been made of that. And you know, she had her days where she was sort of on the Russian equivalent of Big Brother. That's how she started her career. She did some reality style TV, but that obscures the fact that she's a serious woman. She has a very, very thorough and deep knowledge of the Russian political scene, and she's interviewed so many players across the Russian political landscape.
You could say it's in her DNA. Her father was the mayor of St. Petersburg.
Her
mother is
was in the upper house of Parliament, exactly, the upper chamber. So you know, I think it's too easy to just dismiss her. I believe that she's also, you know, she's 35 years old. She's part of this sort of new, younger generation. I think if you take her at her word, I think she's being quite genuine when she says what she wants for Russia is for people just for it to be a civilized country. That where people can live normal lives. I think she senses, and she has her pulse on the country, she senses that a lot of people are just fed up with the old style of politics as usual, the corrupt style of politics as usual. She admits, she knows she doesn't have a chance of beating Vladimir Putin in these elections, but I do believe she sees herself, as you said, sort of as a sounding board for a lot of that discontent, particularly among sort of the new and younger generation of Russians.
I want to pick up on something you said about the sort of the sexist attitude in a way. We mentioned at the outset Tikhon Zyadko, her 5.3 million Instagram followers. You know, some of the pictures on that account are fashion, selfies with friends, and this sort of thing. It belies more substance beneath the surface?
Well, I just want to say that all these words about Russian Paris Hilton or a Russian girl Ksenia Sobchak, I don't like it. I think, well, she used to be 10 years ago. She was participating in all these reality shows, etc., etc. But then they became a serious political journalist, and I spent 4 years with her working on a TV Rain, and I must say that she's one of the best Russian journalists which we have now. She has her own show with a sharp question to the politicians. So this past of Ksenia Sobchak, it's not really important. Well, she used to be that kind of girl, but now she's a mother. She's a very smart woman. She's a very smart journalist, and I think these headlines like Russian Paris Hilton, they are a little insulting, I would say. Also, if I may, I would like to just a short comment about 97% of Russians who think that Crimea is a part of Russia. I've never seen these polls, and I don't think that anyone saw these polls. What we know and what we heard that 86% were supporting the annexation of Crimea, but it was 3 years ago before the sanctions. And also, let's not take in serious polls in an authoritarian country as Russia is today. So 97% is just like the President of the United States likes to say, it's just a fake news.
All right, so disagreement about that.
Can I answer this?
Briefly.
Yeah, because it's a recent poll by Tsiom, one of the leading pollsters, and actually even the people who say that there's a problem with Crimea being Russian, they still agree on this. So they say that it might have caused a lot of trouble to the life, but they still believe it's Russian.
All right, disagreement on that point. Dmitry Boschman, let me ask you about the hashtag that she's launched. I'm sorry, I don't speak Russian, so I'm going by translations here. It's Sobchak against all or Sobchak against everyone. What's the most faithful way of translating it?
Sobchak against all.
What do you make of that? What does that mean for you?
I think that the strategy is more or less correct, because Putin's rating is about 64% now. If he decided to to participate in the elections. So if she doesn't want to just get her liberal votes, and she would rather attract some people who disagree with the same old faces that we've seen around for ages. So this is actually the right strategy. So, and again, I say that she assumes a certain amateurism, and as such, she just wants to become the candidate that everyone would turn to, no matter what views they express.
What I noticed, it's very interesting to me, is because during this press conference, she said, "I'm against all," but she never said, "I'm against Vladimir Putin." She mentioned it 3 times. She's against system, but not against Vladimir Putin as such, as a person, because she said that man helped my father in a very difficult moment, and I cannot say very rough and tough things about him. But if you go back into 2012, when she was giving an interview to Christiana Manpour on CNN, she was saying exactly the same thing. She was not against Putin, but against the system. She said, if, let's say, Alexei Navalny comes in the system, and in 2 years he will become the same person as Vladimir Putin today, in a very corrupt.
Does that make you think that she is a foil for the Kremlin?
No, because it's not against all. If you're not against Putin.
Yeah, I would disagree on this, because Ksenia Sobchak actually was one of the leaders of the so-called opposition coordination committee. Tikhon's brother participated in the same organization, by the way, and she was behind the protests against Vladimir Putin back in 2011. So we cannot say that she all of a sudden she appeared and she's not an opposition figure. She's
what she said, that
critical.
she's not against Putin. Is what I said.
But she during her declaration, he actually
Today.
said the first declaration,
she
when
said
she
it
announced
today.
her ambitions, she said that she's against Putin, Yavlinsky, and some other guys.
She said it today, that she's not against Putin.
At the conference today, she did say, I mean, what she was trying to be extremely even-handed, steering clear of open criticism. She basically said, some people think that Putin is a tyrant and a dictator. Others think that he's Russia's savior. She wasn't passing the judgment today, and I think that was really how she framed her candidacy.
All right, when we come back, we're going to see how Vladimir Putin is doing in practice as we head towards that spring presidential election. Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate.
President of the European Commission struck an upbeat.
La Cour suprême a invalidé la réélection le mois dernier.
France 24 is now more than 10 years old. A different TV channel.
Has also taken the parliament.
3 international news channels broadcast in French, English and Arabic. And from now, France 24 in Spanish. For 500 million Spanish speakers. A dedicated editorial team and a network of correspondents across the continent. A new view of Latin America for all France 24's channels. The Debate, hosted by François Picard.
Live from Paris, a debate on the big story of the day with experts, newsmakers and observers. Continue the debate after the show is over by sharing your views on our forums.
The Debate on France 24 and France24.com.
Welcome back. Before we resume the France 24 debate, some of the stories we're following for you in the newsroom. Egypt has no political prisoners, the claim of its president in an interview with France 24. Abdel Fattah al-Sisi on an official visit to Paris, where his French counterpart refrains from, as Emmanuel Macron puts it, lecturing on human rights. The far right in the German parliament, for the first time since World War II, the AfD, with 1/3 of the seats in the inaugural session of the Bundestag, this after last month's general election. Catalonian separatists to appeal before the Supreme Court to stop the implementation of direct rule. This amid growing speculation of snap regional elections to fend off Madrid from stepping in. Xi Jinping on par with Chairman Mao. The Chinese Party Congress, the Chinese Communist Party Congress, elevates the current leader to the nation's highest-ranking status in decades. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate, and we're asking about Ksenia Sobchak, the daughter of the late protege of Vladimir Putin, throwing her hat in the ring for president. Is she a serious challenger or a convenient foil for the Kremlin? We've been asking Selina, foreign editor for advocacy group Open Russia. Welcome back. Dmitry Boschman, editor-in-chief of Sputnik France's radio station. France 24's Douglas Herbert is with us. And from Washington, Tikhon Dyadko, a journalist for Russian language channel RTVI. Just before the break, Tikhon, Selina Servitaz pointing out that at no point did she directly criticize Vladimir Putin. Is that just smart maneuvering, or has she got a soft spot for the Russian president?
I think that's how she thinks. The first important point is that her family and the family of Vladimir Putin are close, and her father was a mentor of Vladimir Putin, and then Vladimir Putin did a lot of good things for Anatoly Sobchak, the father of Ksenia Sobchak. So maybe this is the reason why she is doing what she's doing, and she's saying what she's saying, because frankly, I think that she's sincere in what she's saying, and she's sincere in her words that she is a serious challenger to, and she's really running for president to fight and not to be some sort of foil. But I agree with Elena that if we look at what she was saying during this press conference, or what she was saying back in 2011, back 2012, she's not against Putin. She's talking about some kind of system. She's saying let's not change the system, but let's try to influence on this system. She's not mentioning Vladimir Putin's name, or she's mentioning it like just barely. I think that it is not some sort of a deal with the Kremlin, but maybe this is how she sees it, and she's sincere with it. But this is the problem. Alexei Navalny, he is saying, and I could only agree with him, that in Russia now there is only one politician whose name is Vladimir Putin, and Alexei Navalny is saying that our enemy is Vladimir Putin, and I am against him. And Ksenia Sobchak, she's saying, I'm not against Vladimir Putin, I'm not against Vladimir Zhirinovsky, I'm against everyone. If you're against everyone, it sounds weird.
All right. And let's listen to what she had to say, because obviously she has practicalities to deal with if she really wants to have her name on the ballot. First of all, she needs 300,000 signatures. And she also needs money. She says she already has anonymous donors.
A large number of businessmen have already expressed their wish to participate in the campaign. It may not be big business, but these are real people who want change in the country.
What does your crystal ball tell you, Douglas Herbert, about that?
You know, it's interesting because you're saying Vladimir Putin's the only game in town in Russian politics, in a sense. And, you know, most people outside of Russia who don't even follow the political scenes would be hard-pressed to name who the opposition candidates are. Yes, people have heard about Alexei Navalny. He's gotten a lot of press, but as we know, he's actually barred from running, right? There are, you know, you have the Communist Party leader. How old is he now, 112? I mean, no, Zyuganov. He's been running forever, it seems, for decades and decades. These are elderly men. You have, I think, Grigory Yavlinsky out there. You have Zhirinovsky, who is sort of, if you want to call him Russia's Trump, he's been called that. He's way out there on the political fringe. These people are sort of the accepted opposition. They're not real opposition. They're not threats. They're token opposition. In the last election, you had an oligarch, Mikhail Prokhorov, who you might remember, owned a basketball team. And he actually got 8% of the vote. But once again, he was seen as sort of a token opposition. He was someone who helped legitimize the election. You see, we have some opponents running. We do have some opposition there. Didn't really stand a chance. The question I wonder now, we recently had regional elections in Russia in September. Very few people talked about them. United Russia, Putin's party, basically won every single municipal seat outside of Moscow. The only upsets were just a few district council seats within Moscow. Otherwise, even in Moscow, his party won about 3/4 of all of the council seats there. So it's extremely dominant. It has sort of a stranglehold, if you will, still on the state media for all the new technology, for all the people on, social media and all those alternate forms of communication. A lot of people in Russia still get their news from the state TV, and that is really what they know. So if you don't have access to that, to the federal TV channels, you are at a disadvantage. And Ksenia Sobchak, that will be interesting to see now. She will have presumably access to the television, state TV.
But also, by today, we know that 95% of Russian people knows who is Ksenia Sobchak, so it's a bit different situation.
She is well known.
Yes, she's very
She's well known. So is, as we've been saying, Alexei Navalny, the anti-corruption campaigner, 41 years old. Fresh out of 20 days behind bars on Sunday, he quipped on social media that while in jail he had read 20 books, learned a few words of the Kyrgyz language, and drunk 80 liters of tea. It's the latest in a long string of arrests for Navalny, but that didn't stop him the same day from going straight to a rally in the southern city of Astrakhan. Your thoughts on Alexei Navalny? Should he be on the ballot, Dmitry Bashman?
Of course he should, because, he's now in a legal struggle against the judicial system. So he's trying to convince them that he has the right to present his candidature. So it's legitimate for him to want to be on the ballot, of course. But the thing is that if he's not, then I don't see why Sobchak shouldn't receive support from his side, for instance, or another major opposition candidate. Because there's one thing about Sobchak's strategy. Elena thinks that it's too soft, she's not really struggling against Putin. But the thing is that the major success that opposition has in Moscow municipal elections, for instance, it came from a strategy that is more sophisticated than just Putin against us. No, it was just some routine things. They were
talking about pragmatic issues.
Yeah, so it's no big words, just playing according to the rules and convincing the electors. So the campaign was very well organized, and the only thing is about this.
Mm-hmm. I'm very happy that the editor of Sputnik radio station says that Alexei Navalny should run for the presidency. It's a very good statement, very strong one. And you mentioned also that he has to have a support of another opposition candidate. Who it is? Who was you talking about?
He may give support to other candidates.
Okay, who is it?
For instance, Gudkov, who has performed well during the municipal elections in Moscow. So Navalny is a leader, but he doesn't have the monopoly on the leadership. So other candidates may arise, even in the opposition camp. There's,
Okay, I just wanted to know that.
Tikhon Tsiagko, what's going to happen with Alexei Navalny at this point in time?
Well, it's hard to say. As I mentioned already, I'm pretty sure that he will not be registered and he will not be participating in the elections because Kremlin does not need him there. But of course, he will not agree with that, and he will continue to protest. He will continue to organize rallies, and he will, I think, call to boycott these elections. But now there is an interesting discussion in Russia because some of Alexei Navalny's supporters, they are calling him to convince his wife to participate in the elections. Yulia Navalny, who is pretty popular among Alexei Navalny's supporters, I'm not sure if she will participate in the elections, but it could be an interesting move from Alexei Navalny because, as I said, he will not be registered as the candidate. But also, we also should not forget that he has 2 sentences, so he can be sent to the jail any moment, and we don't know how it works in Kremlin. We don't know why are they not taking him to the jail now, and we cannot be sure that they will not want to do it, let's say tomorrow. So it's
a sort of Damocles perhaps hanging over his head. Tikhon, let me ask you to react to something Douglas Herbert said earlier, which was just about the fact that you have the state media apparatus, which is in full throttle when there's a campaign in Russia. We talked about Ksenia Sobchak's impact on social media. How much clout does Alexei Navalny have outside of upwardly mobile big cities in Russia?
Look, Alexei Navalny is doing what no one is doing now in Russia. He is he built this absolutely amazing. I'm saying this not as a supporter but of Alexei Navalny, but just an observer, because it's something huge. It's like a 70 offices in main and not main Russian towns, and his supporters, they open offices of his campaign by themselves in small villages and towns, and he understands that if he has no access to the state media, or if the access to the state media is negative for him, because all what they are saying about him is something negative, he should just call people and ask them to go house by house and campaign for him. This is the right strategy, and that's how Alexei Navalny is getting is becoming well known in Russia, but not as well known as Ksenia Sobchak, for example. And I think she's pretty sincere in her willing to get the access to the federal TV and to speak about all bad issues we are having in Russia, about the war with Ukraine, about the problem of the political prisoners, etc., etc., etc. And maybe this idea will have a nice impact, because the more people know about the problems in Russia, then maybe they will understand that we need to change something with these problems.
Your reaction, Selina Servitas, to Alexei Navalny, at least grappling with the idea of how you bypass state media?
Yes, because it reminds me Emmanuel Macron somehow, because he was traveling across the country. What he's doing, Alexei Navalny, he goes door to door, and so it's right strategy. He is visiting villages, he's setting volunteers and headquarters, and yes, you are here. I mean, if you're living in a small city, you can come and listen to him and
Can you get through to Russians without mass media?
You can, of course. For instance, Alexei Navalny is one of the favorite video bloggers of the country. So he's got the means to reach the audience.
However, I will point out, he has been traveling across, to his credit, he's been a real barnstorming campaign, as Americans might call it. He's also been, in many cases, his workers have been encountering intimidation and forceful tactics by police, who have tried to really prevent a lot of his campaign workers from doing their jobs, from setting up offices in some of those cities, or people gathering in groups to campaign on his behalf, because he is, as you've said, is technically barred from running. He's not on the ballot. So there's been quite a lot of actually documented cases of harassment and intimidation against his workers. So even more, in a sense, to his credit, that he has been able to keep up and mount such an active and such a widespread campaign in the face of quite a bit of adversity out there.
Quite a bit of adversity out there. Before we go, I want to ask Tikhon Dyadko about events unfolding where he is, in Washington. Just to paint the picture, Russian state media, the subject of scrutiny in the United States. Congressional hearings continue into whether there was meddling in the last U.S. election. The New York Times reports that authorities now looking into Russia Today's special relationship with YouTube. We can show you a photo from 2013 where a senior exec from the Google-owned streaming site celebrates the channel's 1 billionth view. Since last month, Google now dropped RT from its lists of favorite news outlets. When asked about the threat of censorship of Russian-owned media outlets on U.S. soil, something that's being talked about on Capitol Hill. Vladimir Putin responded in kind last week.
The Americans don't negotiate with the weak. They don't speak to them, and their interests aren't taken into account. That is why in this situation we will act only reciprocally and rather rapidly. As soon as we see steps to limit our mass media services, we will respond in the same manner and quite swiftly.
Tikhon Zyadko, that's not all he said. Vladimir Putin saying, well, a lot of people are acting, I'm paraphrasing here, as sore losers who supported Hillary Clinton, and she lost, and they're blaming the Russians. Does he have a point there?
Well, I think that there is a point there. I mean, I have no doubts that Russian government was trying and sometimes successfully to interfere the elections of 2016, and I am absolutely sure that Russian hackers, they were acting on they were not acting by themselves, but they were acting because they were asked by the Russian government. But it's not the only reason of the victory of Donald Trump, and it's not the only reason of the loss of Hillary Clinton. But of course, the people here in Washington, they are pissed with the result of the elections, and they are trying to blame anyone but themselves, such as Russia Today. But let's see at Russia Today. Russia Today, according to the rating of cable networks here, Russia Today has less than 1% of viewers. Russia Today is not as popular as Margarita Simonyan, editor-in-chief, is saying to all of us. No one watches Russia Today here. Russia Today here. No one likes it, and Russia Today had no opportunity, no possibility to somehow interfere with the election. So I think the problem with the decision or the attempt to register Russia Today as a foreign agent is the response of Moscow, because Moscow will respond, and the response of Moscow will affect American journalists who are working there, such as journalists of Washington Post or New York Times or Voice of America or Radio Free Europe Liberty, etc., etc. They will be just banned from Moscow. And so if you have, on one hand, you have Russia Today with less than 1% of viewers, and on the other hand, you have American journalists in Moscow, what should you choose? I think you should just close your eyes and don't pay attention to Russia Today, which is not, as I said, really popular here in the United States.
Dimitri Boschman?
There's an important point. If we apply the same rules to other media, then there'll be a problem even with this show, because we've been talking about the opposition figures mostly in a positive way, and does it mean that we try to influence the elections in Russia? I guess it doesn't. So we should just keep calm and just let the diversity of opinions and the battle of different points of views take place. That's the only thing I can say.
When you think back to the 2012 re-election of Vladimir Putin, how has the media landscape changed in Russia itself since then?
It definitely changed. It was like when I remember 2012, it was completely different country, no war, no opposition figure killed. The channels were much more free. And the channel that Tikhon Zyadko mentioned, TV Rain, was accessible to any house in Russia. It was just needed to pay, and you have it through cable. Now it's only visible through internet. No foreign agents, no journalists live in the country. I mean, it's completely different thing.
I'll even go back a little further and age myself and date myself. But when I was working in Russia way back in the mid '90s, there was an explosion of free and independent press. You would go into the Moscow metro. They had kiosks there which actually sold the New York Times in Russian translation. Briefly, it survived for about a year or so before it sort of went under. But there was almost too much press. Russians didn't know what to read. There was so much press out there that they stopped reading literature for a while. No one was reading books anymore. They were just reading periodicals and papers.
What about the 96 elections?
I'll admit, though, that there's a little bit of nostalgia on my part for those days. I miss that proliferation.
Do you believe that the media were doing right when
I'm not saying
how
right or
they
wrong.
behaved during the '96 elections?
No. First of all, I'm talking about international press. I'm talking about not just Russian press. I'm talking about the proliferation. There was an abundance of press of all views across the political spectrum.
All right, and speaking of press, it's time. I want to say thank you to Douglas Herbert, Elena Servitas, Dmitry Boschman, and Tikhon Zyadko in Washington. It's time for Media Watch. And we say hello to James Creedon.
Hi, Francois.
As we've just been talking about, how social media and how mass media cover this campaign will matter immensely when we look at Russia's presidential election in the spring.
It sure will, and some interesting headlines already, I think, in reaction to this announcement. Let's take a look, first of all, at two headlines from The Independent in the UK. Russia's Paris Hilton to challenge
Vladimir Putin. There it comes again.
I didn't come up with it, I'm just repeating. So, you know, clearly she's being belittled and sort of dismissed across the board in a lot of different headlines. Her quotes here, I think this headline is also intended to show that she's not really a serious sort of rival to the Kremlin and to Vladimir Putin. This is a quote from today. "He saved my father's life. I'm not going to insult him." So gloves won't be off by the sounds of things. A couple of headlines now in the French press. This is the Belgian French language newspaper Le Soir. The candidate chosen by the Kremlin to take on Putin in the presidential election. So they are in this headline more or less saying that she's a Manchurian candidate, that she's been picked, that she's sort of the pick of the Kremlin. I think that's the most extreme version of the headlines.
Do you agree with that version?
I cannot say that so, but it's very interesting also to read.
I mean, they're being unequivocal in that headline. I think it's kind of, I doubt they have proof of that. Elsewhere, somewhat softer, but no less sort of critical headline here in Libération, the left-leaning daily here in France, facing Putin, a TV star, and I think a kind of a cheap TV star, a glittery TV star. There you go. It's certainly not painting her as a serious candidate in any case. And
I have another example. Actually, I would rather say Donald Trump, a guy who comes from showbiz and who has some notorious record of his past activities. So, but he still made it to the White House.
There were on Twitter a lot of comparisons because she at one point during the press conference talked about, I come from reality television, I know what communication is about.
And I think that is a quote that was lifted actually by the Moscow Times here, if I have that quote. You can laugh at me, but I understand show business, so my job is to rewrite the rules to bring a new face to the show. I think it's true to say that we've seen candidates dismissed in the past for being lightweight or whatever. Perhaps we're speaking a little bit too soon. But just let's get back to the narrative here, which is the headlines that are being entirely dismissive. Ksenia Sobchak, l'ingénue de la présidentielle russe. How would you translate that? It's another dismissive, I think, way of describing her and the dream rival. So there you go. Look, across the board, the headlines are just completely saying, this is what Putin wants, it's no real challenge, it's going to split the opposition, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's the sort of received wisdom for now. But of course, as we've seen in the past, received wisdom can be altogether premature. Just a little detail here. She is the editor-in-chief of originally the French fashion magazine L'Officiel, which has, of course, versions like Vogue magazine all over the world, and no less so in Russia. And you can see here her Instagram footprint is pretty impressive with 5.3 million followers. Just a couple of reactions then on social media to this. This is to the press conference today. So far, the number of journalists trying to cover Ksenia Sobchak's first press conference as presidential hopeful outnumbers her supporters. So there you go. Well, it seems like we're a lot more...
It's a press conference.
We're getting more excited about this perhaps than anyone really following her seriously for now. And here you have this kind of detail as well that is being picked up, the fact that she won't insult Putin. A lot of people are kind of, I think, curious about that. So I guess we'll have to see where it all goes.
All right. Many thanks for that, James Creed. And I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.